Hello again, everybody. It's me, Michael, not Leon, just in case we were confused once again. So don't worry about that. I'm here with you on a Tuesday and Thursday this week. And as well as having the privilege of being with Nish, we also have another Mike, the greater of the two. Mike's got with us today for science. How you doing, Mike?
Good morning. Morning, everybody. Are you okay?
Yeah, we're good, mate. I've been looking forward to this. Always, genuinely, because obviously I go back and look at the other sessions to make sure that see how I can improve. I always like your ones, and your ability to write with your device, make that the writing there, actual handwriting every single time.
This is my mouse.
Yeah, remember that when you said it was his mouse? I was like, what?
I'm joking. I'll do a bit of product placement. I bought a Wacom bamboo board.
Okay, yeah, my brother-in-law's an artist, and obviously he does a lot of that sort of stuff with the pads. Yeah.
Love it.
Well, Wacom, if you're listening and you want to sponsor me, you know where to contact me.
Yeah, even
I know you should. He says Wacom about every session that he has.
Who's that?
You.
Oh, me? I don't see that. Yeah, it's product placement.
You need to share your video with them, mate. Get on Twitter. That's what you should do.
Exactly.
So if all of us log into Streaming School for your next session, a T-shirt branded up and a hat, you know what's happening.
I can shave Wacom in my hair if they want.
Oh, gosh.
What's the focus for today's session?
We're going to be looking at the circulatory system.
Nice. All right, thank you. Well, I'll leave it over to you. Nish, obviously, Mike.
Yep.
Take it away.
No problem, guys. So, in our previous lesson, we looked at the digestive system. We looked at how cells make up tissue, and tissues make up organs, and organs make up organ systems. So we've covered the digestive system. The second system that you will need to learn about in your GCSEs is the circulatory system. And the circulatory system is made up of three main parts. It's made up of your heart, it's made up of the lungs, and it's also made up of blood vessels. And the circulatory system's main purpose is to circulate blood around the body so that we can provide our tissues and cells with oxygen that we use for respiration. But just before we get into that, let's just have a look at exactly what blood is composed of. Blood technically is a tissue because it's made up of different cells working together. Now, if we was to look at the components that make up blood, let's say that I've got a test tube here of blood. Well, just over half of that blood, about 55%, it is a straw-coloured liquid called plasma. Plasma is responsible for carrying carbon dioxide. It carries hormones around the body. Oh, and it also carries a chemical called urea, and we will look at urea in later lessons. The remaining 45% of blood, is made up of red blood cells. Red blood cells typically have this donut shape, and the purpose of a red blood cell is to carry oxygen. The red blood cells have this pigment that we call hemoglobin, and that hemoglobin binds to oxygen to carry it around the body. We also have white blood cells. And we looked at white blood cells in our previous lesson. If you remember, white blood cells are there to destroy pathogens. And the final component is something called platelets. And platelets are responsible for forming blood clots or scabs. They're typically there to stop us from bleeding out or losing too much blood. And you need to know the main components, being plasma, white blood cells, red blood cells, and platelets. And you should also be able to state their role in the circulatory system. But what we're going to do now, guys, we're going to take a look at these blood vessels. And remember, it's the blood vessels that are responsible for carrying the blood around the body. And there are three main vessels, and I'm going to number them as number 1, number 2, and number 3. I'm going to rub the rest of this stuff out because we don't need this anymore, and I'm going to need that space to write on. So if we take a look at blood vessel number 1, and what I'll do is I'll use a nice red color. So blood vessel number 1, this is called an artery. Okay. Oops. Okay. This is called an artery. Now, we can tell that this is an artery because it has a very thick muscular wall. If you look quite closely at the artery, I'll just shade in a different color. You can see, look, you've got this thick muscular wall, this thick muscular fiber here. The reason that we have this thick muscular wall is so that the artery can withstand high pressures. Okay? Because the artery is responsible for taking blood away from the heart. The artery needs to have these thick muscular fibers so it can withstand that high pressure of blood that's leaving the heart. Let's look at blood vessel number 2. Oh, just to add to you guys, actually, just a point here, that the artery carries oxygenated blood. Okay, so the blood that flows through the arteries would typically be oxygenated. If we look at the second blood vessel, and I'll change my color here. If we look at the second blood vessel right here, you can see that we have veins. Veins typically carry blood to the heart. So they take blood to the heart. And if you look at the structure of a vein, you'll notice that a vein has a much thinner muscular wall. It doesn't have those thick elastic fibers. And the purpose for that is that the blood is at a much lower pressure. So it doesn't really need to protect itself from the blood being at high pressure, because the vein is taking blood back into the heart, and the blood is at a much lower pressure than it is in the artery. The veins also have a structure that we call valves. Now, the valves in the veins play a very key role. What the valves actually do is they stop blood from flowing backwards. The last thing that we want in our body is for these valves to become leaky, because if they become leaky, then blood will flow in the wrong direction, and that's the last thing that we'd want to happen. And again, just to add to your knowledge here, that the veins are responsible, and I'll just put it over here, that the veins are responsible for carrying deoxygenated blood. So the arteries carry oxygenated blood and the veins carry deoxygenated. And then we've got our final blood vessel, the capillary. And you'll notice that the capillary, is 1 cell thick. Okay, it's an extremely thin blood vessel. And that suits its purpose, actually, because in the capillary, this is where oxygen, carbon dioxide, and glucose need to diffuse. So, glucose is constantly diffusing out of the capillary and going into our cells, into our tissues for respiration. Oxygen is continually diffusing out of the capillary, again, to go into our cells and tissues for respiration. And carbon dioxide is constantly diffusing into the capillaries, as carbon dioxide is a product of respiration. So these 3 blood vessels play a very key role in the circulatory system. I'm going to finish this part of the lesson, finish this topic with us looking at the heart. So if I just swap pages, here we go. What you should be able to do is, in your exam, you would be expected to be able to label the key parts of the heart. Typically, the heart has 4 chambers that I'm going to label here. These top 2 chambers are known as atria. And it's always important to remember that the diagram of the heart will always be given back to front. So although this atria is on your left, it is actually the right atria, making this one the left atria. So the top 2 chambers are called atria. The bottom chambers are called ventricles. And again, we don't need the S on that. Again, we just assign this one as the right ventricle, and this would be the left. So we've pretty much done the basic parts of the heart. We've got 4 chambers. The atria are at the top, ventricles are at the bottom. Now we're going to get a little bit more technical. Blood enters the heart at the right atrium. So blood comes in to the heart here. But remember, it's a vein that brings the blood into the heart. Now, the main vein in the body is called the vena cava. And it's the vena cava that brings blood into the heart. So I'm going to put, I just had a eureka moment there. What I'll do is I'll put number 1, because that's the first stage of blood entering the heart. So blood goes from the vein, the vena cava, it then goes to the right atria. From the right atria, the blood gets pushed or pumped into the right ventricle. Okay? And now we're really going to get technical, because following this diagram, hopefully you can see that blood would come in here, it would get pumped into here, and then it would get pumped out here. Okay? And where the blood gets pumped out here we call this the pulmonary artery. I'm going to label that as number 4. And I'm going to pause there, because anytime you hear the word pulmonary, it just means lungs. So the pulmonary artery is responsible for taking blood to the lungs. When the blood gets to the lungs, it's there where it picks up oxygen. The blood then re-enters the heart, and it re-enters the heart on the left side, and it re-enters through the pulmonary vein. Remember, veins bring blood back into the heart. So I'm going to label this one as number 5. After we've been to the pulmonary vein, the blood then goes to the left atria. I should have just kept the red. So the left atria comes after the pulmonary vein. So I'll label that as number 6. The blood then gets pumped from the left atria. It goes down, and hopefully you can see here, it goes into the left ventricle. So the left ventricle is the 7th kind of stop for blood through the heart. After blood's been pumped into the left ventricle, it then gets pumped out of this vessel here. It's this one right here, okay? And this vessel is called the let me scribble that out. This blood vessel is called the aorta. And the aorta is the main artery in the human body. And that artery will take the oxygenated blood to the head and to the rest of the body. And I'll label that as number 8. So what you would be expected to do in your exam, you could be given a diagram of the heart, and they typically ask you to label maybe 2 or 3 different parts. They won't be that cruel and ask you to do any more than that, but you know, in order to label the diagram, you do need to know all the parts. A typical 6-mark question. The question could ask you to describe the pathway of blood through the heart. And what you would have to do is, start from the vein to the right atria, to the right ventricle, to the pulmonary artery, to the pulmonary vein, to the left atria, to the left ventricle, and then to the aorta. And if you can structure all of those points there into a paragraph, then you would get your 6 marks. I just want to point out one last thing, because I know that my time is running out, and I can hear you guys say no, stay for more. I just want to point out one last thing, and I'll use, let me find a nice bright queer, I'll use a pink. I'm just going to draw your attention to these. So I'm just going to put a ring around these, okay? You will notice that within the heart, just like in the veins, we have these structures called valves, okay? And the valves in the heart have the exact same purpose as the valves in a vein. And that is, they make blood flow in the right direction. Again, you do not want blood flowing backwards in the heart. And it's It's these valves here. It's the valves here that keep the blood flowing in the right direction. So I think your question for today, forgive me because I wrote it last week, but even if it's not, I'm going to add another question. If you look at this diagram of the heart, can you explain why the left side of the heart is a lot thicker in muscle than the right side? Think about where the left side pumps blood to and why that side might need to be a little bit thicker than the right. Drop mic.
As in drop me or drop you? Is that
drop Wacom.
Drop Wacom.
Right, thank you. That was really, really useful. Thank you so much for that. It was
yeah, not a problem.
That was nice. What's your plan the rest of the day, sir?
Not a problem. Well, I've done my morning run. I've done my exercise, so I've got a bit of tuition in about 2 hours. So just going to prep for that, and then I've got about four tuitions today. Then I'm on easy street.
Fantastic. Well, enjoy that, and thanks again, Michael. It was a pleasure.
Nice. All right, guys. Take care. Yeah.
Thank you. You too.
Right. Blessings. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Blessings. Bye. Bye.
That was good, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was good. It was good.
As always. So just to highlight what Mike was saying there are that task that he wants you to explore based on the session. But Nish, if you're now happy to share the presentation with everybody, wait a second. I'm a little bit slow today, but essentially what Michael wants us to also look at, if we possibly can, is the notion of what a stent is. So based on that session, we need to now discuss and describe what a stent is as well, which you can find all of the resources from today on the system itself. You can also go back and watch any of Michael's sessions across the platform or the various social media outlets as well. And I believe, Nish, that in around 2 or 3 minutes' time, it's time to move from science to Spanish.
Yep. So I'll see you in a couple